Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast about gardening, botanical history, and literature. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and today is June 2nd, and there are just 18 days until the first day of summer. It's closing in. Today we celebrate an English novelist and poet who started out as an architecture student, and one of his very first jobs was moving a graveyard. We'll also learn about a writer of charming garden verses, and we'll hear an excerpt about lilacs. We grow that garden library today with a look at some of the most exclusive private gardens in Paris. And then we'll wrap things up with the birthday of a New York architect and children's book writer who wrote about a spelling bee, a bee that would come in handy when it comes to writing botanical Latin. Don't you agree? All right, it's time for today's curated news. All right, today's curated news is a fun one, and I don't think you need to be living in England to participate. It's going to be full of great ideas that you can incorporate into the natural world. This is an article that was shared in Countryfile magazine. Explore the British countryside, that's their tagline. But this article is about a celebration that they host during the month of June. It's called 30 Days Wild. It's by the Wildlife Trust, and it's a nature challenge. And what they want people to do is to go out and do something wild in nature every day for the month of June. And so there you have it. You have the slogan, 30 Days Wild. Now, in this post by Caris Matthews, what a great name, she writes about how to bring more nature into your day and take part in the 30 Days Wild campaign. And so what Caris did is she kicks things off by giving you 30 great ideas, ways that you too can participate in this campaign, which I think is a fantastic idea. And I don't know why there can't be a 30 Days Wild around the world. So what I wanted to do is get you started with just a handful of Caris's great ideas. I'm not going to read through all 30 of them, but I will share it in the listener community on Facebook. But in the meantime, here are a few of Caris's ideas. First up is bird watching from your garden window. Definitely have your binoculars handy. In fact, up at the cabin at our favorite windows where we like to look out at the lake, I have a little sideboard, and this sideboard has like 4 little tiny drawers. They're not very big, but they do happen to hold 4 binoculars. And it definitely came in handy last week when we discovered we had a mother duck nesting right there on my deck in my kitchen garden. So my planting plans were a little thwarted, but I have to say we've had so much fun watching this mother of 9, as I've been referring to her. My husband's been making fun of that, but I noticed that there were 9 eggs in her nest, and so I've been calling her Mother of 9. So Mother of 9 is out there, and I've been watching her with my binoculars, and that's a great way to connect with nature. And I have to say, the kids were completely surprised at just how well this mother duck was camouflaging herself. She was nestling right down into that nest, even right there out in the open. She was very difficult to spot. Now, another tip that Caris mentions is identifying flowers. You can challenge yourself here by going through your garden. Do you know the names of all your flowers? Do you know the names of all your weeds? Those are great ways to connect with nature and to learn a little bit more about them. Now, one of Caris's other suggestions that I know I personally enjoy is watching wildlife webcams. And they're now everywhere. You can see all of these wonderful videos on TikTok, over at Instagram, on Twitter. So if you don't have one that you're following, definitely Google it. You'll find a ton of them. Another activity is to forage for your food. I thought this was a great idea. And right in this post, Caris provides a June foraging guide in addition to some recipe ideas. So that's always fun. Whether you're talking about wild garlic, elderflower, blackberries, fern fronds. It's probably a little late for those, but there are so many wonderful things that you can be doing. And then, of course, there are some things that are very specific to Britain that are in this post, but that's all right. You can tweak it to your area and create your own 30 Days Wild. But Karis has got you started here, so you can definitely do that. And you can also head on over to the Wildlife Trust and join their campaign there, because you will get emails from them and they will give you tons of suggestions. All right, so with that said, if you'd like to track down this post, just search for the word wild when you're in the Facebook group for the show, and you can check this all out and get inspired to be more wild. All right, and then if you're not in the group, don't worry about it. You can join at any time. You have a standing invitation, and I would love to meet you. I would love to see pictures of your garden. I would love to help you out with any questions that you might have. Maybe something garden design related, or just want to commiserate with fellow gardeners. It's all good. So if you'd like to join the group, and I hope that you do, all you need to do is the next time you're on Facebook, hopefully my words ring in your ears, and you head on up to the search bar, type in the words Daily Gardener Community, and then request to join. I'll see you in the group. All right, it's time for today's botanical history. Here's botanical history for today, June 2nd. Today is the birthday of the English novelist and poet Thomas Hardy, who was born on this day, June 2nd, in 1840. A Victorian realist like George Eliot and a fan of John Milton, Thomas Hardy was a product of provincial England. The romanticism of William Wordsworth influenced his writing, and today Thomas is remembered for his novels that were set in rural Wessex, Far from the Madding Crowd, which was written in 1874, and Tess of the D'Urbervilles, which was written in 1891. Now, before we get too far into Thomas's story, I thought you'd enjoy this little excerpt from a book by Sean Bythel. It's called The Diary of a Bookseller, and in it, Sean writes about a common mispronunciation of Thomas's first literary success. Here's what he wrote. A customer at 11:15 a.m. asked for a copy of Far from the Maddening Crowd. Well, in spite of several attempts to explain that the book's title is actually Far from the Madding Crowd, he resolutely refused to accept that this was the case, even when the overwhelming evidence of a copy of it was placed on the counter under his nose. Well, the printers have got that all wrong. Despite the infuriating nature of this exchange, I ought to be grateful. He has given me an idea for the title of my autobiography, should I ever be fortunate enough to retire. And in Tess of the D'Urbervilles, Thomas gives us a charming description of summer. He wrote, "The season developed and matured. Another year's installment of flowers, leaves, nightingales, thrushes, finches, and such ephemeral creatures took up their positions where only a year ago others had stood in their place, when these were nothing more than germs and inorganic particles. Rays from the sunrise drew forth the buds and stretched them into long stalks, lifted up sap in noiseless streams, opened petals, and sucked out scents in invisible jets and breathings." Today, the National Trust takes care of Thomas Hardy's charming thatch cottage and garden near Dorchester. The cottage was built by Thomas's great-grandfather. Now, in 1891, workers were digging on Thomas Hardy's other property called Maxgate. They were installing a drain in the driveway when they discovered a large Druid stone which thrilled Thomas, and he set it in his garden. Nearly a century later, it was discovered that the Hardy house was situated on top of a large Neolithic enclosure, an ancient stone circle and burial site. With that in mind, here's an excerpt from a poem that Thomas Hardy began writing in 1913. It's called "The Shadow on the Stone," and it took him nearly 3 years to complete it. And just so you know, the shadow of the gardener that he sees on the stone is that of his wife, Emma, who had passed away. I went by the druid stone that broods in the garden, white and lone, and I stopped and looked at the shifting shadows that at some moments fall thereon from the tree hard by with a rhythmic swing. And they shaped in my imagining to the shade that a well-known head and shoulders threw there when she was gardening. Isn't that sweet? Now, if we roll back the Thomas Hardy timeline to the 1860s, when Thomas was a young man before he became known as a poet and writer, Thomas Hardy was working as a trainee architect. He was going to school in London for architecture. And one of his first jobs was to move remains and grave markers at St. Pancras to make way for a railway line. And you might recall that Charles Dickens referred to the St. Pancras churchyard in his Tale of Two Cities. That's the place where Jerry Cruncher used to fish, meaning he robbed graves. Well, as for Thomas Hardy, despite his unhappy task, he had a burst of inspiration, and he decided to place hundreds of the headstones on their sides and nestle them around a nearby ash tree. Well, the effect of those headstones was that of a sunburst radiating out from the trunk of that ash tree. And over time, the tree became known as the Hardy Tree at St. Pancras Old Churchyard in London. And as the tree's roots intertwined with the headstones, the Hardy Tree developed a bit of a reputation. And as you can imagine, it fascinated generations of future writers. Today, the Hardy Tree is still surrounded by those grave markers, and it's a curious stop for tourists in London. And today is the birthday of the artist, costume designer, poet, and writer Minnie Aumônier, who was born on this day, June 2nd, in 1865. And I discovered that after making a tree for her on Ancestry. Over the years, Minnie's life story has passed into obscurity, although we know that she was born into an artistic family. In 1876, her father, William, founded an architectural sculpture firm in London known as Aumônier Studios, and her uncle, James, was a painter. Now, Minnie wrote some beautiful verses about the garden. Here's a sample. "There is always music amongst the trees in the garden, but our hearts must be very quiet to hear it." You can tell that Minnie was romantic and sentimental. Her poetry is sugary sweet and winsome. It's the kind of verse that ends up on garden art, like this one. "When the world wearies and society ceases to satisfy, there is always the garden." It's time for today's Unearthed Words. Today's Unearthed Words come to us from the author and native New Englander Martha Hall Kelly. This is an excerpt from her debut novel, Lilac Girls, which was a New York Times bestseller back in 2016. Carolyn wiped her cheek with the back of her gardening glove, leaving a dark smudge below one eye. then pulled off her gloves. But it's fitting in a way. Father loved the fact that a lilac only blossoms after a harsh winter. Carolyn reached over and smoothed the hair back from my brow with a light touch. How many times had my mother done that? It's a miracle all this beauty emerges after such hardship, don't you think? It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Secret Gardens of Paris by Alexandra Darnaud and Bruno de Labadère. This book came out in 2000, and in this book, Alexandra and Bruno offer us a sneak peek into some of the most exclusive private gardens in Paris. Most are unavailable for tours or visitors, and many of these hidden gems have been maintained for centuries as secret gardens and retreats that have been passed down through families and owners who relish their private slice of heaven on earth. These gardens range from formal to eclectic. There are Japanese-inspired gardens, tropical or exotic hideaways, topiary gardens, and urban retreats, just to name a few. This book is 176 pages of privileged access to 50 private Parisian gardens. You can get a copy of Secret Gardens of Paris by Alexandra Darnaud and Bruno de Labadère and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $3. What a steal. Finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. Today is the birthday of the New York architect and children's book writer Norton Juster, who was born on this day, June 2nd, in 1929. In 1961, Norton wrote his most famous book, The Phantom Toll Booth, which tells of a little boy named Milo who receives a make-believe toll booth with the power to take him to the lands beyond. In this imaginary world, Milo meets many extraordinary characters, including a bee obsessed with spelling. Here's a cute little excerpt. Then, just as time ran out, he spelled as fast as he could, Vegetable. Can you spell everything? Asked Milo admiringly. Just about, replied the bee with a hint of pride in his voice. You see, years ago, I was just an ordinary bee, minding my own business, smelling flowers all day, and occasionally picking up part-time work in people's bonnets. Then one day, I realized that I'd never amount to anything without an education. And being naturally adept at spelling, I decided that at that moment, another far-fetched character enters the story. Now, the etymology of the curious blend spelling bee has never been fully established, although it's a distinctly American term. When the pioneers were settling this country, they held all kinds of bees to help each other accomplish arduous tasks more quickly. For instance, there were sewing bees and quilting bees, husking bees and logging bees, spinning bees and apple bees. There were also fire brigades and barn raisings, both clearly missed opportunities for fire bees and barn bees. Just saying. But perhaps that's how we got the term spelling bee. Maybe people just added the word bee to any novel social gathering, and somehow spelling bee seemed to be perfect, a friendly term describing a high-pressure competition intended to motivate kids to learn how to spell. And the term first appeared in print in the 1870s. Recently, word experts have suggested that the word be was rooted in a Middle English word for favor or prayer, bene, which is the root of the word beneficial. Over time, bene became the English word bean, which is defined by Webster's as voluntary help given by neighbors toward the accomplishment of a particular task. So the new theory is that the word evolved over time from bene to bean to be. Over on his blog, Scientist Sees Squirrel, Stephen Hurd shared a post called Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Latin Names, in which he included the very hard to spell Weberbauer Assyrius cephalomacrostibus, which is a cactus, and Cryptodidymus virites princetonensis, which is a fungus. Stephen writes, these names mostly have one thing in common. They try to do way, way too much. They try to mention a place and the name of a related taxon and a descriptive trait and another descriptive trait and then modify that, and then they keep on going. Crazy. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. The Daily Gardener is produced in lovely Maple Grove and Wyoming, Minnesota. If you want to read today's show notes, just head on over to thedailygardener.org. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for my free Friday newsletter. And don't forget that you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. Just search for Daily Gardener Community the next time you're on Facebook and request to join. Last but not least, you can always get in touch by emailing me at jennifer@thedailygardener.org. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and as always, have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you tomorrow. And we grow that garden library today with a look at some of the most exclusive private gardens in Paris. Ooh, I'm missing something. One second. Oh, today's created. All right, here's today's. So if you ever come over to visit, that's where you'll find the binoculars. Despite the infuriating. It's infuriating not to be able to say infuriating. That's not correct. Let's try it again. Infuriating. Here we go. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Secret Gardens of Paris by Alexandra d'Arnaud and Bruno Dulabadere. Dulabadoo. Scooby-Dooby-Doo. Where are you? Okay, clearly was saying that wrong. Well, this might even be laughable. Bruno Dulabadere. Wow, I've completely butchered that. Okay, great. Wonderful. Here we go. Weberbauer Assyrius cephalomacrostibus. Weberbauer Assyrius cephalomacrostibus, which is a cactus, and Cryptodidymus virites. Cryptodidymus virites. Princetonensis. Weberbauer Assyrius cephalomacrostibus. Weberbauer Assyrius cephalomacrostibus, which is a cactus, and Cryptodidymus virites. Cryptodidymus virites princetonensis. Wow. Let's try it again. Cryptodidymus virites princetonensis, which is a fungus.